This video is the third and last presentation about the works of Richard Kaufman, pioneering architect and town planner in Palestine and Israel, whose widely published photo you see here. The first video focused on his early career planning early kibbutzim and moshavim, agricultural settlements. The archetypical example is Nahalal, a moshav ovdim, or workers' moshav, known around the world for its unique design. The second video continued to explore Kaufman's prodigious planning of agricultural settlements and garden suburbs around the major population centers of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, as well as the first regional development plan for the Haifa Bay region. This video focuses on Richard Kaufman, the architect. It should be stated at the outset that he was not a Bauhaus architect, although many have categorized his architectural style that way. His style is more related to the earlier international style, as influenced by his association with Mies van der Rohe in Holland. However, all of his work in Palestine stresses Kaufman's uniqueness and the individual character of his design, and distinguishes him from the other architects working in Palestine in the 20s and 30s, even those inspired by the international style. However, Kaufman's style did have similarities to that of the Bauhaus school. Both stressed the functional over the purely aesthetic. Both had simplistic lines and clean facades that eschewed ornamentation and symmetry. You will see later that he was also an innovative structural engineer, as exemplified by his novel roof designs for keeping the inhabitants of buildings that were in extremely hot areas relatively cool. His designs reflected the practical realities of the local environment, such as prevailing winds and extreme temperatures. He also made designs for major hotels, office buildings, medical and university campuses, major exhibition halls, and power plants for the generation of electricity, as well as the communal buildings for the many agricultural settlements he planned. Kaufman's residential architecture can be viewed today in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Rechavia, where he lived, for example. The house and private clinic, built in 1931 for Dr. Victoria Cuzco, located at 21 Hess Street in Tel Aviv, has been fully refurbished and stands out from the poorly maintained Bauhaus-style buildings of that area, even though it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Although Kaufman never owned a house, he built for many prominent persons, such as Menachem Yushishkin, an early Zionist leader in Palestine, and for a wealthy Egyptian banker by the name of Agion. The Agion House is now the official residence of Israel's Prime Minister. It is the subject of the next segment. The Agion House that you see in this recent photograph, also known as Beit Agion in Hebrew, is the official residence of the Prime Minister of Israel. It is located at 9 Smolenskin Street, at the corner of Smolenskin and Balfour Street, straddling the upscale Jerusalem neighborhoods of Rechavia and Talpiah. Richard Kaufman designed both the residence and the plan for Rechavia. The residence was completed in 1938 and is an example of the international style of architecture. The house has an impressive provenance. It was built for a wealthy Jewish Greek merchant named Edward Agion, an affluent resident of Alexandria, Egypt. Between 1939 and 1940, it served as the home of King Peter II of Yugoslavia at the beginning of World War II. Around the time of Israel's War of Independence, it was converted into a makeshift military hospital. In 1952, the State of Israel purchased the house to serve as the official residence of then Foreign Minister Moshe Sharet. After Yitzhak Rabin became Prime Minister in 1974, it was given its current role as the Israeli Prime Minister's residence. It would be hard to recognize the original building as it exists today. For security reasons, a high wall has been built around it. Several attempts have been made to build a new Prime Minister's residence nearer the main government office buildings. However, the current Prime Minister has stated that the expense would not be worth it, and he prefers the current residence. Here you see an original drawing of the Avichai House as conceived by Richard Kaufman. Quoting from Wikipedia, the building is composed of several square blocks connected to one another, and in the center of the building there is a stairway decorated with a row of windows in the front. The front of the building also includes a section molded in a circular way and in a boat-like style, typical of the international style. The building's facade is Jerusalem stone. The building also consists of an inner courtyard or patio, an element that differs from the common international style, but which is commonly found in Muslim-style buildings. The patio was most probably added originally due to the Agion family's request. The common characteristics of the international style include a radical simplification of form, a rejection of ornament, and an adoption of glass, steel, and concrete as preferred materials. Further, the transparency of building construction, called the honest expression of structure, and acceptance of the industrialized mass production techniques. The ideals of the style are commonly summed up in 3 slogans. Ornament is a crime. Truth to materials. Form follows function. The international style was a precursor to modern architecture. The big 3 names in modern architecture in the 1920s and 30s were Le Corbusier, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and Walter Gropius. Kaufman's work held closely to the principles of the international style, but was more attuned to the unique nature of the Palestinian landscape and environment and the specific needs of the people, as will be seen in the subsequent photographs. Here you see the original school designed by Richard Kaufman for the kibbutz Degania Alev. Right away you can see the distinctive roof design with its elevated second roof, a substantial height above the interior roof. This lightweight roof reflects the sun's radiation and what is absorbed is cooled by the breeze flowing between it and the building below. Kaufman is believed to be the first to employ this natural cooling technique, thus showing his keen intellect and understanding of climatic conditions in Palestine. Notice also the expansive glass windows in 2 of the classrooms, providing plenty of natural light in the interior. Because school was held in the mornings and early afternoons, late afternoon and evening sun shining directly on the windows was not a problem and would warm the building for the cooler night. Notice also the rows of crops being planted. Degania was the first Jewish communal settlement to be established in Palestine, then under Ottoman rule. It is located at the southern end of Lake Kinneret, also known as the Sea of Galilee. The name is derived from Dagan, which means corn. Although it is called a kibbutz, technically Degania Aleph was actually a kivutza. The distinction comes from the practice of children sleeping in separate quarters in kibbutzim, but sleeping in their parents' quarters in a kivutza. The kivutza was established with the name Degania in 1911 after succeeding to make a profit from their crops during a trial year as the Hadera commune. Unfortunately, it did so without the benefit of adequate town planning. Kaufman, when he arrived in Palestine in 1920, went shortly thereafter to Degania. To quote his observation, "I found it a perfect example of incorrect planning. The wind blew from the garbage dump to the barn, bringing flies and odors, and from there to the kitchen, where it picked up the cooking smells and brought the whole mixture to the dining hall and living quarters." The visit led him to recognize the importance of the country's prevailing west wind and to site houses so as to exploit its cooling effect while placing odor-producing elements downwind. Kaufman's attention to climate played a key role in all of his architectural designs, especially those in extreme conditions, as shown in the next photograph. This is an aerial photograph of Dead Sea housing on the northern shore taken in 1931 that is part of a collection by the American colony now deposited in the Library of Congress. It is captioned Dead Sea Potash and can be found in the June 26, 2012 edition of the Jerusalem Post in an article titled Israeli History Photo of the Week, Palestine Potash Company. Three of the buildings have the additional roof elevated above the main building, similar to the roof of the school in Degania Aleph. This second roof is raised about 2 meters above the main roof of the building to allow wind to carry away the heat and to reflect the heat away from the building. Other photographs of the Palestine Potash Company, now known as the Dead Sea Works, show many of the old workers' houses with the elevated second roof. These current photographs show them to be in a state of disrepair since the use of electrified air conditioning has made them superfluous. But in their day, such air conditioning did not exist, and Richard Kaufman designed an effective solution for workers living in an area of intense sunshine, the Dead Sea. In his article, An Appeal to Richard Kaufman on his 70th birthday today, published in the Jerusalem Post on June 20th, 1957, H. Rao wrote the following: "It has been a long time since we first met when Richard Kaufman built those fine houses on the shore of the Dead Sea that were so completely adapted to the difficult climate down there and breathed so well in their aesthetic modernity the atmosphere of that lonely and majestic depression. Never again, despite all endeavors, was the quality of this achievement equaled in our country." This photograph, taken in 1928 by Richard Kaufman, shows 3 of his creations: a new residence for the prospective owners, and his 2 daughters, Ruth on the right and Esther, my late wife, on the left. This is the only photograph of his children at a building site among hundreds in our Kaufman family collection, so it must have been quite a treat to go with their father to see what he did in practice. Although too young at the time this picture was taken to appreciate the building methods Kaufman chose, Esther, later in life, when looking back at her father's work, realized how advanced it was for his time. This building was solidly built using reinforced concrete. You can see the iron rods in the front wall and the temporary wooden support boards that were used to hold up the layer of concrete above while it cured and strengthened. You can also see the outlines of the boards on the outside used to create the forms into which the concrete was poured. Later, the walls would be plastered smooth and whitewashed. Note the cantilevered overhanging structure in the front of the building. It would provide shade in the warmer part of the day and let in light in the evening, a technique common in today's passive solar housing construction. In an article by H. Rao entitled, quote, "Kaufman Pioneered Rural Planning," unquote, published in the Jerusalem Post on March 7, 1958, a month after Kaufman's death, he stated that Kaufman disassociated himself from the local building tradition and was more attuned to the specific social and physical requirements of the country. He was particularly sensitive to the strong solar radiation in and around Jerusalem and other parts of the country. Not only would the concrete overhangs provide relief from direct sunlight, but also the solid mass of the concrete would be slow to heat in the day and slow to cool at night, thus evening out the internal temperature compared to the outside. You are looking at a photograph of the original floor plan for the residence of Dr. Victoria Cuzco, designed by Richard Kaufman. If you look at the lower left corner of the plan, you will see Richard Kaufman's stamp on it, and that it is dated December 20th, 1931. The house is located at 21 Hess Street, which is in the UNESCO-designated World Heritage Site. The house was built for Dr. Cuzco in 1931, and it housed both her clinic and her living quarters. A wing of the Silberman Building of the Alexander Silberman Institute of Life Sciences has the same name, suggesting she was a prominent doctor in her time. At the time of this photograph, you could probably see from the house the blue waters of the Mediterranean. Now, however, there are many large commercial buildings surrounding it. It still stands apart from its neighbors due to its size and appearance. The house sits at the corner of Hess Street and Idelson Street, which are about 2 blocks from the Allenby, 3 blocks from the Tel Aviv Civic Center, and about 6 blocks from the Mediterranean Sea. Dr. Cuzco was one of several well-known physicians of that period residing on Idelson and Bialik Streets. The entire first floor was converted for use by the clinic. A third floor was added in 1935. In a travelogue describing the house on Idelson Street, the house was described as among the most beautiful in the city of Tel Aviv. To quote, "This stunning house is huge and is surrounded by trees, cacti, and flowering shrubs." An article on the architecture of Tel Aviv contained further details. To quote, "A study of the ground plan reveals it to be a conformation of squares and a cubic interplay of volumes, imparting a sense of lightness that would remain even after the addition of the story. To achieve a clean, uncluttered facade, the gutter was incorporated with a column at the center of the building. The canopies above the balconies and windows were planned to allow penetration of the level rays of the winter sun and protection from the perpendicular rays of the summer sun. The cantilevered slabs accentuate the building's horizontal lines, as does the rusticated plaster finish of the ground floor wall, with dark brown protruding bands set off by white joints. This ornamentation was Kaufman's only use of the Art Deco motif on the Cuzco house. Kaufman designed the residences of other prominent persons, including the Hashim-Soni House and the Usishkin House. Richard Kaufman was responsible for designing dining halls for many of the settlements he planned. Here you see the dining hall at the kibbutz Merhavia, located near Afula in northern Israel. A notable resident of Merhavia was Golda Meir, the 4th Prime Minister of Israel. Dining halls were the central communal building in most kibbutzim and moshavim. Not only were they used for meals, but also for important governance, social, and cultural events. Nearly every agricultural settlement had a dining hall that was often the largest building that could hold the most people. It was usually centrally located, within easy reach of the members of the settlement. This is a classic example of Kaufman's architectural style, with rectangular doors and windows and plain facades with strong horizontal lines. all of which were characteristic of the international style. They also show the inclusion of climatic conditions in his designs. Note the open shaded space under the hall. A residence designed by Kaufman is believed to be the first building in Palestine to be at least partially elevated above the ground using pillars. Here you see the dining hall at the kibbutz Herods, also located in northern Israel on the boundaries of the Jezreel and Bath-Schema valleys. Again note Kaufman's attention to climate, with the pronounced canopy over the entrance and the row of clear-story ventilation windows. This photograph was shown at the Kibbutz Architecture Without Precedents exhibition in the Israeli Pavilion for the 12th Venice Architecture Biennial 2010. Here is a photograph of a Passover Seder gathering in the dining hall of the kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, taken in 1953, a standing room only occasion. The dining halls were the focus of communal life and were often revered by those who lived with them from their early days and by successive generations. Eating together at the same time and usually consuming the same food reinforced the binding forces that held the community together. It also provided a forum for the everyday exchange of ideas, suggestions, comments, and complaints. Here, you see the dining hall of the kibbutz Ein Herod, also designed by Kaufman. A group from Germany is being welcomed. Kaufman's architecture took form in the late 1920s, about the time when the Bauhaus school of design was becoming popular among young architects. Recently, on November 24, 2011, the Bauhaus Center in Dessau opened an exhibit titled Kibbutz and Bauhaus, for which Esther was asked to contribute some photographs of her father's parents. The exhibition opens with a chronicle of the utopias and realities of this development based on specific kibbutzim. Included on the website of its announcement was the photograph of the dining hall at Ein Herod. To quote from the website, emerging architects and planners such as Richard Kaufman and Samuel Bickels brought the ideals and methods of new architecture from Europe to Palestine and had a lasting influence on the planning and design vocabulary of the kibbutzim. A new architecture for the new Israel in a new land. Richard Kaufman designed several large buildings, some of which were built. Two large designs that remained on paper were for the Grand Hotel and the Assicurazioni Generali Corporation building. Here you see the design of the Grand Hotel. The design makes a strong statement expressing the principles of the international style of architecture, with long sweeping curved horizontal lines and generous use of overhangs. The building was to be placed at the intersection of several roads, at the open circle, and so conformed to the existing space between the roads. Note the absence of ornamental embellishments, as was common in the Oriental style architecture of the time. This is the proposed design for the Assicurazioni Generali Corporation, one of the largest insurance companies in the world at that time. Kaufman did not win that job, because the company decided to use the same architect that had built for them in their home country of Italy. The resulting building looks like it was imported from 19th century Italy and is no longer used by the company. The Generali building in particular is suggestive of the characteristic prow front shape that later became prevalent in Bauhaus architecture. It was also to be placed at the intersection of several roads at an open circle, and so conformed to the existing space between the roads. This is a photograph of the diesel-powered electric generating plant near Haifa, which was built. Kaufman first drew up the plan for it in 1924. He also drew up a plan for a similar power plant in Tiberias. Both were part of an electrification project under the direction of the engineer Pinchas Rutenberg. Rutenberg's own story is quite interesting. When arriving in Palestine after a tumultuous period in the Bolshevik Revolution in Tsarist Russia, he wanted to start the Palestine Electric Company, but funds were short. He managed to get funding through none other than Winston Churchill, who was colonial secretary at the time. In 1923, Berlin-based architect Erich Mendelsohn was asked to design the Haifa power plant. However, his design was rejected by the British High Commissioner as being too European. Kaufman prepared an alternative plan that was subsequently modified and built. It became operational in 1925 and is said to be the first modern building in Palestine. Both of Kaufman's power plant buildings made use of reinforced concrete. The drawings can be found in an article authored by Kaufman, titled Planning of Jewish Settlements in Palestine, published in the November 1926 issue of the Town Planning Review. Here we see a collage of 4 photographs of the Tozeret Haaretz Pavilion at the Levant Fair, also known as the Orient Fair, which was held in 1932, 1934, and 1936 in Tel Aviv, Palestine. Tozeret Haaretz means produce of the land, and this pavilion was the showcase for the local products and produce of the host country. Photographs are situated at each corner superimposed on another photograph of a 3-dimensional model of the fairgrounds and all of the buildings. Each building housed the items from a particular country. Many countries around the Middle East and Europe were represented. It was, in fact, the equivalent of the World Fair for that time period. Not only did Kaufman design the Tozeret Haaretz Pavilion, he also assisted in the planning of the layout as seen in the model. The model is surprisingly accurate as compared to an existing aerial view of the fair. You can see the Tozeret Haaretz building in the upper center of the model. In the upper left corner, you see a photo of this towering pavilion taken at the 1934 fair. The lower building in the foreground is a different pavilion. In the lower left corner, you see a sketch of Kaufman's building showing his stamp and signature. In the lower right corner, you see a photograph of the large sculpture titled The Hebrew Worker. It can be easily seen in the middle of the model. Behind it, in the photograph, is Kaufman's building. Finally, in the upper right corner, you see a photograph of the interior of the building showing all the different display booths and many people showing great interest. I must also mention that all the Levant photographs can be found on Flickr and are from Philip Messner's Levant Fair group. It is interesting to note that the Levant Fair is having a revival. A May 19, 2009 article in Haaretz states that Tel Aviv is trying to rebuild its very own version of the produce of the land, Totzaret Herods Palace, the largest and most important structure of the Levant Fair. The palace, designed by noted architect Richard Kaufman and dedicated in 1934, sprawled across 3,400 square meters and was designed in the international style. The interior space soared to a height of 3 stories, with an observation tower situated on one end and a kind of apse on the other end. Next to its sparkling white facade stretched a large public plaza, at one end of which stood a sculpture of the Hebrew laborer. On May 4th of this year, 2015, a tour of the fairgrounds will start at the southern entrance. The announcement reads, "The architect Tal Eval, who is in charge of the Levant Fair Pavilion preservation works currently underway, will focus on the already restored pavilion in the complex. The produce of the land palace, which was designed by the architect Richard Kaufman and dedicated in 1934. It was the main pavilion at the original fair and showcased the achievements of the Hebrew industry. Its ship-like design is considered as one of the pinnacles of the international style architecture." On May 23rd of this year, 2015, a guided tour of the proposed site will start at the Hebrew worker sculpture at the center of the pavilion. The announcement reads as follows. The architect Zadok Elvakin from Elvakin Architects, whose firm is in charge of the Levant Fair Renewal and Development Project, will present the plan for the site. Currently nearing completion, the plan aims to restore the fairgrounds complex to its former glory. It is based on the original design made by the architect Richard Kaufman and connects the network of pedestrian and bicycle traffic to an uninterrupted link of public spaces ranging between the city, HaYarkon Park, and the Tel Aviv port. The tour lasts about an hour. Kaufman also made plans for the new university city of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem to be built on Mount Scopus after Israel became a state in 1948. You are looking at the current map of the university. According to the university, Kaufman's vision has guided campus development since the reunification of Jerusalem. Its guidelines of respecting the past, while at the same time encouraging future growth, is an important part of Jewish heritage and is reflected in the development of the university. Before we leave the presentation about Richard Kaufman's architectural accomplishments, it is worth noting the importance placed on water towers. Kaufman would typically place the center of a settlement on or near the top of a hill or elevated area. Thus, the water tower for the community, which would be placed on the high point, would also be in the center. water towers were multifunctional. In the early days, before the tower and stockade outposts were constructed, the water towers would act as observation towers for the purpose of defending the settlement from marauders, which were common, especially during the 1936 to 1939 Arab uprising. As an example of Kauffmann's inventiveness, Esther told about her father's use of mirrors on the watchtowers. Watchtowers would often be equipped with strong floodlights to light up the surrounding area in order to detect attackers at night. Of course, one of the first targets of the attackers would be the floodlight. In order to preserve the floodlight, Kauffmann designed a system of mirrors. The attackers would shoot at the mirrors, which were easily and quickly replaced, leaving the floodlight from being destroyed. Here you see a diverse array of representative water towers in Israel from both early and current times. First, let me point out that all of the photographs were obtained from Wikipedia under the terms of the GNU Free Documentation License. Starting at the upper left-hand corner, they are positioned clockwise in accordance with the founding date of the community. You will see a wide array of uses that these towers have and hear briefly about their local history. The first photo is provided by the town of Gadara, which was founded in the winter of 1884 by members of the Bayu group. The next photo is in the Mizrach kibbutz, which was established in 1923 by the first immigrants of the third Aliyah and is situated on a tell named Ruba al-Natra. The next photo is in Yad Mordechai, which was first established in the 1930s by Hashemir Hatzar members from Poland. It was named in honor of Mordecai Anselewicz, who died fighting the Nazis while being the commander of the Jewish fighting organization in the Warsaw Ghetto. The next photo is the water tower in Eilan, established on 400 dunams of land purchased in 1938 by the Jewish National Fund. Today, the tower is the office of the music center Keshet Eilan. A world-renowned violin master course called Keshet Eilan takes place annually in Eilan. The next photo is in the kibbutz Alonim, established on June 26, 1938, as part of the Tower and Stockade settlement campaign. The settlers were the first graduates of Youth Aliyah. The objective of these settlements was to seize control of land that had been officially purchased by the Jewish National Fund, so to have as much Jewish-owned land as possible populated by Jews. The next photo is of the remains of a water tower in the kibbutz Negba, which was founded in 1939 as a tower and stockade settlement, the first lasting modern Jewish settlement in the Negev desert. The next tower is in the area of Yitzhak Wells in the Negev of biblical fame. Yitzhak was, by profession, a well digger. This shelled water tower is near the remnant of the historic site and was established in 1943. The next photo is in the kibbutz Shamrat, which was founded in 1948 by Moshamar Hatzer members from Slovakia and Romania. Some of the founders fought with the partisan forces against the Nazis in Europe, while the majority came out of various Nazi concentration camps. Finally, the last photo is in Ein Dor. Ein Dor was founded in 1948 by members of the Hashemir Hatzer youth movement. The founders were from Israel, Hungary, and the United States, and were joined later by members from South America. All of these photographs lead one to the history of the struggle of Israel to become a nation. Kaufman was responsible for planning many of these settlements. In this last view of Richard Kaufman's life, we bring to a close the sixth in a series honoring the memory of my late wife, Esther Kauffmann Forsen. The main focus of this video was on Kaufman's architectural accomplishments, ranging from his inventive solutions to the extreme climatic conditions faced by the Dead Sea potash workers' quarters, to lovely homes of persons of stature in Palestine, to communal dining halls that served as the focus of settlement life, to larger industrial and exhibition buildings. He was largely consistent in his use of reinforced concrete, a fairly new technology at the time, and used it to express his manifestations of what has been called the international style, with which many well-known pioneers of modern architecture were associated. His work was a precursor to, and sometimes erroneously characterized as belonging to, the Bauhaus school of design, and his use of overhanging projections and natural ventilation are the foundation of today's passive solar design. In many ways, Kaufman's keen mind in addressing the needs of his clients, who were many, provided solutions that were way ahead of his time. Kaufman was most prolific in the earlier years of his career. Towards the end, his opportunities dwindled as the next generation of architects and planners succeeded in obtaining government positions in the new state of Israel and in taking the lead in capturing much of the large construction projects. Esther has said that she remembers that her father would keep his staff fully employed with full wages even when there were fewer projects, and that her own wages were used to supplement the family's income used for daily subsistence. When faced with imminent death, Kaufman regretted not having provided for the future of his family. But he was a most generous man when it came to helping others, as discussed in an earlier video. He will be remembered mostly as an architect and town planner, as you can see from the inscription on his tombstone, which states simply in Hebrew, planner of the town and the settlement in Israel. There were many who praised Kaufman for his work both before and after his death on the 3rd of February in 1958. In an article published in the Jerusalem Post on June 20, 1957, titled An Appeal to Richard Kaufman on his 70th birthday today, the author, Heinz Rau, himself a prominent architect, ends his appeal with this admonition, quote, "The position of anyone who remains outside the struggle is therefore as regrettable as it is enviable. He should fight not with words, spoken or written, but with deeds, planning and building, just as he did in those bygone days. The profession's best wishes to the man who has done so much for it include a hope that his 70th birthday may prove a turning point in this respect," unquote. It's quite possible that the cancer that finally took his life was at this time already sapping his strength. In an article published in the Jerusalem Post on March 20, 1959, about a year after Kaufman's death, titled Pioneer of Planning, Tribute to Work of Richard Kaufman, the author, Ariel Kahan, wrote at length praising Kaufman's contributions to the planning of settlements, towns, and college campuses, but ended by stating, Kaufman's artistic approach and the method of his office, and characterized by the high quality of graphic rendering in his drawings and perspectives. Therefore, it seems fitting that his graphic legacy, which is professionally and artistically as well as historically important, is to be handed over to the Zionist archives. Richard Kaufman was a trailblazer for his profession and his country, yet it was unavoidable that the ideas he represented became common property and were followed out by younger men who no longer pondered the fact that Kaufman had been their mentor. After independence, he continued to be recognized as the profession's dean, but was no longer offered the scope of work that would have satisfied him. To the new generation of planners who had to find solutions for much wider and more complex tasks than before, he was ready to give advice and constructive criticism. But these were taken only partially. After a rich life of full recognition, this disappointment darkened his last years. It is not enough that his memory lives on for his friends and colleagues. The official histories of Zionism and Israel architecture will have to give an appropriate place to Richard Kaufman. It has been this very goal that my wife, Richard Kaufman's daughter, had undertaken and been the dream of much of her life. And it is the one that I am committed to carrying out in her memory. All of Kaufman's works, his plans, drawings, and his personal papers were given by his wife, Bath-Schema Kaufman, to the Central Zionist Archives shortly after his death. The trusteeship for the collection was in the hands of Esther, and in accordance with her will, are now mine to execute. In addition to several other articles that are too many and too long to be included here, I should mention the complete translation of the Treatise on Kaufman, written by Lottie Kahn, an architect who was an early assistant to Kaufman before establishing her own firm, and who was a great admirer of Kaufman. We obtained a copy of this work, which is biographical in nature, and was dedicated to Bath-Schema Kaufman, and we had it professionally translated from the original that was in German. The work treats not only Kaufman's career, but is a portrait of the man and his character and ideals. Lottie Kahn was also the designer of the tombstone that you see in the photographs from an article by Inez Zander. To quote from the text of the article, Lottie Kahn was commissioned by his widow Bath-Sheba to design his gravestone. She wrote about her two different drafts. One sketch is for a flower bed or green plantation covered with a little stone. The other is to cover the whole grave with a flagstone with a bush as a tree as the headstone. She goes on to say, in both drafts, I intended the stone treatment to be brutalist, preferably natural. With this, I think about our poor Richard, who loved natural, not artificial, treatment.